Hey guys, welcome back to Gardens and Grace. For those of you that don't know me yet, my name is Tasha. We're in the very early part of July right now, and I'm going to talk through some of the things I'm planting in my garden, how you can think about what to plant in your garden. And I also want to talk a little bit about our fall garden season and how we can utilize that time, before it gets cold and even into maybe a little bit of the early winter, depending on the area that you're in. To still grow food. A lot of times people don't take advantage of the fall garden season, and I want to talk about that. I want to talk about how we can take advantage of that time where we're starting to get cooler, but it's not freezing yet. So today I was out in my garden and I was doing a lot of projects, a lot of things, just in the garden, cleaning some things up, resetting some things. And as I'm kind of going about the garden and my normal chores and harvesting and all of those things, I was thinking about, okay, what am I going to plant next, and what do I need to starting from seed now, and what am I going to do when I harvest my onions, what am I going to put there, and when I harvest my kale, what am I going to put there? And so I want to encourage you, as we talk through these things, I want you to start thinking about that in your garden too. Hopefully you are growing a garden. If you haven't got started yet, you still have time in most areas. We're going to talk about that a little bit too. But let's talk about the first frost date. So for me in my area, my first frost date, we're in the beginning of July right now. My first frost date is not until mid-November. It's about November 16th. I think there's been some question between November 4th and November 16th, but I kind of err on the November 4th side, early November side, when I'm planting my garden for a light frost by November 4th. And possibly the chance of a hard frost by November 16th. So we'll talk about the difference a little bit in that. Just kind of think of it this way, that you have certain plants and your seed packets. When you go to start seeds, the seed packets will tell you a lot of information. You have some plants that can withstand a mild frost, a mild freeze, which is anything between 32 degrees and 28 degrees Fahrenheit. So you have a lot of plants that can tolerate a mild freeze, but can't tolerate a hard freeze. And a hard freeze is going to be anything below 28 degrees Fahrenheit. So kind of keep that in mind. As you're looking at the back of your seed packet, it's going to tell you a lot of information. Right now, I have a long time before my first frost date, so I can grow most things. I can still plant indeterminate tomatoes and get a harvest before my first frost date. I'm actually still planting indeterminate tomatoes. So succession planting, I've talked about that in some other videos about the importance of succession planting. Right now on my back porch, what I'm doing is just every couple weeks I'm starting seeds. I have cups like this or small cell trays. I have a table, and I don't need to start seeds indoors because it's really warm outside. So most things I'm able to start out here. Now, when I start talking about the fall garden and cold hardy plants, plants that like the cold, we'll talk a little bit about the importance of starting those inside. But for now, if we're talking about like an indeterminate tomato, I can start this outside on my table on my back porch. You can also grow things like determinate tomatoes. Determinate tomatoes, where they're going to set their fruit, they're not going to get real big, and they're going to set, they'll get between 4 and 5 feet tall. And they'll set, most determinate varieties will get between 4 and 5 feet tall. Some smaller, some a little larger, but around that window, around that range of 4 to 5 feet. So even if I was to grow something like a determinate tomato, I have plenty of time. The determinate tomato is going to set all of its fruit at one time, and then I can harvest it and I can preserve it. So if you want to do like some preserving or some canning, a determinate tomato would be a great way to go, especially right now as we're entering the month of July. We're at the very beginning of July right now. I can still grow things like squash, your summer squash. I can even still grow winter squash in my area because, like I said, my first frost date isn't until November. So the first thing you want to do to determine what you're going to be growing, what you can still plant in the month of July, is determine when your first frost date is. So you can just look on Google, just do a quick Google search, put in your zip code, first frost date for whatever zip code, and it should give you either a range of dates, which would be your first chance of the light frost versus your first chance of the hard frost, or it'll just give you that hard frost date. Zucchinis, this is a zucchini. do not like any type of frost. So I know that, you know, before November, this thing's gonna peter out, but that's okay. Zucchinis grow really fast. I can still grow those in my area. More than likely, depending on where you're at, but more than likely, you could still plant something like a zucchini plant. So to determine what you can still grow in your area, once you determine what your first frost date is, you can look at the time that you have, like how many days you have from now until your first frost date, and find varieties that mature within that window. Your seed packet's gonna tell you that. Your seed packet may tell you, like on a zucchini plant, it may be 50 days or 60 days or something to that effect. You know, for leaf lettuce, it's gonna be 30 or 40 days. And you'll be able to look at the back of your seed packet and see how many days from, you know, planting to maturity. And that'll tell you when it's time to plant that, whatever that cultivar is. Now, like I said, I'm still planting zucchini. I know that I have quite a long time before the nights start getting cold. Zucchinis do not like cold. I have bell peppers. I literally just started this bell pepper. I know that I have plenty of time to grow this bell pepper before it starts getting cold. But I'm not going to be planting things like cabbages yet. I'm not going to be planting things like lettuce. Why? Because it is way too hot in my area right now to start lettuce or cabbage. Those are plants that like it colder. So those are things I want to grow in a fall garden, even into the early winter in my area. Honestly, I can grow a lot of really cold hardy varieties during all year round. There's cabbages and kale and even lettuces that I can grow all year round in my area with a little bit of frost protection. We'll talk about that in a second. But basically, for you right now, think, depending on your area, you know, if you're looking at your first frost date being in November, like me, I'm in zone 8A. So I'm looking at, you know, my frost date being that November time frame. I know I have quite a bit of time. I know that I can grow just about anything right now. I could start just about anything that is heat loving and it would still do okay. Let's say your first frost date is something like the beginning of October. Well, in that case, you don't have quite as much time as I do. That's okay. There's still a lot of heat loving varieties that you can grow between now and October. You're just going to want to, like I said, look at the back of the seed packet to make sure that you have enough time for that plant to reach maturity. So things like, for me, okra. This thing is really leggy. This thing is really leggy, but I have okra. I can still grow okra in my area. Okra takes a long time to mature. I don't even remember exactly how many days for this variety, but I know it takes a while, but it's okay. By the end of July, I won't be able to plant any more okra. But I still have time right now. And even though we're in the heat of the summer, right? We're like, today it was like 95 degrees outside. I'm also starting to think about the fall garden. I'm starting to plan it. People plan different ways when it comes to their garden and their garden space. I use an Excel spreadsheet. That's just who I am. And I have my garden laid out in an Excel spreadsheet. There are plenty of there's plenty of software that you can use. There's plenty of you know, different ideas. You can get out a piece of paper and draw out your garden and start planning out your fall garden that way. But I do want to encourage you to start planning it, because a lot of times what I found as a new gardener, one of my biggest challenges was keeping my space planted. So I would be growing something and I would harvest it, and I wouldn't have anything else ready to go in that space. So I would start seeds. After I would harvest something, I would then start seeds. And by the time I got it planted, you know, I had wasted a good amount of time just waiting for my seed to germinate and begin to grow, where I could have started it in cell trays long before I harvested whatever crop I was pulling out of the ground. So kind of be thinking about that, kind of be planning, you know, kind of be, you know, taking into account what you want to grow and how long those varieties are going to take to reach maturity. That's the first place you start with garden planning. And as we're talking about the fall garden, I know that I want to grow a bunch of cabbage. I want to grow some kale. I want to grow lettuce. I want to grow spinach. I want to grow all of those things in the fall, because in the spring, it just gets too warm too fast for me to really be able to grow cabbage well, or my lettuces for very long. So because of that, I have much better success in the fall, and even honestly in my area into the winter. Broccoli is another one. Broccoli takes a long time to mature. Well, for me, I don't have a long time for it to mature in the spring because it just gets too hot. But I can grow it in the fall in the cooler temperatures and be able to get a substantial harvest in the early winter. And it'll get a little bit sweeter as it begins to go through light frosts that happen in December. So harvesting broccoli in my area in December is a good time for me. That may not be true for you depending on how cold your area gets. In my area, the temperature doesn't start staying cold until about the end of December. So, we may have some mild frost before that, but usually, typically, the real winter doesn't set in until December in my area. So I also know that the fall time is the perfect time for me to plant onions and garlic. And so because of that, I will plan out what I'm going to plant, figure out when it is best to plant it in my area. If you're new to this, I would do some research, right? Google is your best friend. I know in my area that planting my onion seeds about October or maybe even early November is about right. And planting my garlic in December time frame is right. So because of that, that's when I know I'm going to plant those things. So I'm already accounting for that in my garden space during that time. I also know that, in August, I want to starting my seeds for my cabbage and my kales and my spinach. Now, in my area in the middle of August, it's really hot. My brassicas germinate in cooler soil temperatures. So in the middle of August, I'm not going to have very cool soil temperatures outside. But what I can do is take those things inside under grow lights. I can get them to germinate in my air-conditioned house where the sun's not beating down on them. And then by the time, within a month or so, I'm able to plant them out into the garden and grow them, like I said, really throughout the whole winter. So those are things you want to start thinking about when it comes to planning your fall garden. And it's really going to start, so important. Look at the back of the seed packets. Whatever it is you want to grow, when is the best time to grow it in your area? What soil temperature does it like to germinate? How long does it take for that plant to reach maturity? How much space is it required for it to grow? And you can take that information and you can begin to build a garden plan. Because if you build a garden plan, what you're going to have is a lot less wasted space, a lot less wasted time, and a much better chance of harvesting the things that you actually want to eat. So I do want to encourage you. A lot of people kind of avoid that fall growing season. They think the growing season is done in like July and August and September. Man, you're missing out. Depending on the area that you're in, like I said, if you're in a very cold climate, this may not be applicable to you. But if you're in somewhere, even down to zone 5, you can still grow at least through part of your fall. And there are a lot of things you could grow. If you do live in a colder place, there are a lot of things you can grow given some, give them some frost protection. When I say that, I mean like a frost blanket or a row cover or something of that nature. So in my area, what I'll do is I'll actually plant a lot of my brassicas in my raised garden beds. I have some raised beds. If you've been on any of my garden tours, you've seen them, but I have raised garden beds that are built with wood. One of the reasons why I built those is so that I could easily put a frost blanket over them and keep that. Also, raised beds kind of keep the soil temperature a little warmer anyway, but putting that frost blanket over them and it's a confined space, and I can grow a lot of food in just those 3 beds over the winter. And that's usually what I do. I'll have, kind of onions and garlic planted in other places in the garden, but I'll use those 3 raised beds to grow the majority of my brassicas. It also kind of helps because it's right out of my back door. And so when it's really cold outside, I can go out and pull carrots or Pro tip, carrots get really sweet if they go through a little bit of a frost. So definitely keep that in mind, that your carrots will get sweeter after a mild frost. Your kale will too. So, don't think that you can't grow during the fall. Even if it, like I said, even if it gets a little cooler in your area than it does in mine, you can still grow food, at least for a considerable amount of the fall. So definitely check, that first frost date. Look at all the information on the seed packets of what you want to grow, whether it prefers the warmer temperatures or the cooler temperatures, how cold hardy that plant is, what temperature does it like to grow in, what temperature does it die in. And as you begin to gather that information, you can put together a garden plan for your fall garden. I also will tell you that when it comes to things like squash bugs, when it comes to things like vine borers for your squash, I'm talking about those a lot because those are like my biggest nemesis in the garden, is squash vine borers and squash bugs. And zucchinis is one of my favorite things to grow, so it's really sad for me. But you won't have as much pest pressure oftentimes in the fall. So like I said, for me, it's going to be a lot the squash bug and squash vine borer, but it's also going to be white flies. On my kale right now, I have white flies, and as it's getting warmer, that white fly infestation is getting worse and worse and worse. So I'm going to have to actually pull my kale out and wait to start kale again in the early fall. I have a lot less caterpillars in my garden in the fall and into the winter. So my cabbages are a lot safer during that time frame as well. So something to keep in mind, a lot less pest pressure in your fall garden. You're gonna have a lot less chance of disease. Things like blight, it likes humid, wet weather to be able to thrive. Well, I do have a little bit of that in the fall, but not nearly as bad as what I deal with in the summer. So I find that there's a lot less disease issues in a fall garden as well. So now we're kind of talking all over the map right now. I'm talking a lot about your cool weather crops and also your heat loving crops, because in my area, I'm able to still grow my heat loving crops. Now pretty soon, like I said, in about a month or so, I'm gonna start really starting by seed my cool weather loving crops. Right now, my focus is still going to be on my heat loving varieties. But even as I'm planting my heat loving varieties, I'm thinking about, okay, when I pull these out, what am I going to put in its place? So as I'm putting a plant in the ground, I am starting seed for something else, or planning when I'm going to start seed for something else that's going to go in the space of the plant that I'm putting in the ground, even as of now, so that my garden space is never wasted. That's that succession planting, and I've talked about this in other videos, but that's so important as you go forward with your garden, that you keep that space growing, keep it productive, keep something growing in that space. Don't allow that real estate, valuable growing space, valuable real estate, to be wasted. So like right now, I'm still planting melons. Melons aren't even growing for me right yet. I've started some by seed in the ground, and I've got some more that I'm about to plant out this coming weekend. But we're in July, and I haven't even really started growing melons yet, which is, I'm a little bit behind, to be honest with you. I should have started them last month in June. But I know that I still have time. I'll still have melons before the end of the season. But even as I'm putting my melons in the ground, I'm thinking about what's going to ultimately go in their space once I pull those out. And I'll start thinking about starting those things from seed. Melons do take a considerable amount of time to grow. Just be aware. Different cultivars, different varieties, there's different links. You can look at, like I said, back of the seed packet gives you a ton of information. But yeah, I just want to encourage you, if you're new to growing in a fall garden, or if you're new to growing a fall garden, definitely try it this year. It's totally worth it. Not to mention, it's not as hot. So I like warm weather, but I don't like excruciatingly hot weather. Today it was 95 degrees outside, and it took all of my willpower to come out here just to do a few chores around the garden. So in a fall garden, it's not going to be quite as hot. It's not going to be quite as miserable. And I'm going to be able to get a lot more done and enjoy growing produce in the fall much more than I enjoy growing it in the summer. So, but definitely be thinking about your fall garden. Definitely be thinking about what else you can plant in the month of July. I will tell you, in my area, I'm still planting, in most areas, you can start your determinate tomatoes, you can start summer squash, even if you don't have a long growing season left. Determinate tomatoes, summer squash, you could do potatoes, like a 70 to 90 day variety potatoes. In a lot of areas, you could still do that. You could still start, you know, like I said, for your warm weather stuff, you could still start cucumbers. Cucumbers don't take a whole long time. You could start bush beans. They don't take very long at all. In fact, definitely start bush beans. Even if you have some growing, start some more. Bush beans grow all throughout the season. Great way to utilize your space. They don't take up a lot of space and a great thing to grow. Use your bush beans to fill in any gaps in your garden, and you'll thank me for that, I promise. You can also start thinking about growing cabbages, lettuces, depending on where you're at. If it's still too hot, like I said, still too hot in my area. So you may be able to start those now, depending on where you are. You may wait till August. You know, it just depends on your area. But cabbages, lettuces, your carrots, you can even, you know, start carrots here pretty soon. Carrots do like a soil temperature that's a little bit cooler to germinate. You can use a board to cover them or something to cover them until they germinate and then take it off. That will kind of help keep the soil moist. Most things are going to want a moist soil, and in the heat of the summer, your soil is going to dry out quickly. So germination might be a little bit harder, but you got turnips and beets. Those are cool loving plants that you could definitely grow. They're root crops. And like I said, even if you can't start them right now in July because it's too hot, in about a month or so, you can probably start those in your area as well. And once they're established, they can take cooler temperatures. They can't do it when they're young seedlings. They're not going to be able to take cooler temperatures very easily, but once they're established, they are going to be able to take those cooler temperatures easier. But yeah, definitely think about a fall garden and what you want to grow in it. Now is the time to start planning for it, even though we're in the heat of the summer. Now is definitely the time to start planting for a fall garden. I hope you found some of this information useful. I hope you found some tips. I hope you got inspired. I hope there's some things you picked out of this that you want to start growing in your garden. I'm gonna take you along the journey as I start my fall garden. You're gonna see a lot of that. As I'm pulling things out, I'm gonna show you what I'm putting in behind it throughout this growing season. So definitely stay tuned for that. But again, depending on where your zone is, depending on where you're at, depending on your first frost date, you may need to start things earlier than I do. Or if you're in somewhere like Florida or California where it's really, really warm and you don't have to worry about a frost at all, you know, you can probably grow all year round without any protection. And you're probably gonna enjoy the winter growing season even more than you do the summer growing season because it's probably stifling hot. If you're in Florida, I know it's stifling hot. I grew up there. So, but anyway, I hope there's some tips in this that help you start thinking about your fall garden and what you can continue to plant in the month of July. And so thank you guys so much for hanging out with me in my garden today. May your garden be filled with grace and may you be abundantly blessed. We'll see you next time. Bye.